the sound of speed is not that much faster than an arrow. So by the time the sound gets there, that arrow is just about there too. It doesn't really give them time to duck it. But to think of the fact that we can almost sometimes see an arrow in flight, but if they can process that information that much faster, they can probably track that arrow and see that arrow coming at them. And they get their acuity then, not from looking at a stationary object. We'll talk about a test we did of their visual acuity here in a minute, but they get it through motion. And that motion gives them that 3D image. And it's why they can run through the woods at breakneck speed, because instead of having to follow every stick, branch, stumping as they're running, they don't have to look at everything. They see it all play out as a panorama as they're going through the woods. That's just cool stuff.
That's cool. Someone needs to make like a deer vision simulator where you can see what that would be like. Does that exist?
No, it's not, because you still have to look through human eyes to see that, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so unless you want to take your eye out and put a deer's eye in,
it's 2024. People are doing some weird stuff these days.
I'll tell you, there's some hardcore whitetail hunters that, if given the chance, they would have their eyes replaced.
Yeah, we probably know a couple of them.
That would be really cool, wouldn't it? So if you look on top of that, then, one of the things that our visual acuity and having that really acute vision gives up, you have to give up something physiologically. And we give up a little bit on what's called processing speed. Now, deer don't have to have that real great focus, so that means they have an opportunity to have greater processing speed. And we actually did a study that looked at this processing speed. And it's called a flicker fusion rate. And this flicker fusion rate, you've all experienced this. You've seen these examples where a light starts flashing and it gets faster and faster and faster until you can't see it anymore, right? It's still flashing, but it overwhelms our eyes' ability to process that information. Well, we did that with some deer. I had another student working on it, and she did some of these trials in our deer pens. We subsequently did it again looking at it with another student. And what it turns out is deer are able to see that flashing much lower at much higher speeds than we are. As a matter of fact, it turns out their processing speed is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 times our processing speed, which means that if there's movement, they can pick it up 4 to 5 times faster. When they're walking through the woods, it's like things are happening to them in slow motion. They can pick it up that well. So that processing speed is just incredible, particularly in high light situations. It's not that much better. It's better in low light situations, but really high in high light situations. And that processing speed, you hear about people saying they had a deer jump an arrow, right? And everybody thinks that they've heard the bow, right? Well, I got to thinking about that, and the sound of speed is not that much faster than an arrow. So by the time the sound gets there, that arrow is just about there too. It doesn't really give them time to duck it. But to think of the fact that we can almost sometimes see an arrow in flight, but if they can process that information that much faster, they can probably track that arrow and see that arrow coming at them. Or at least they can see, after the release, they see the bow move and the bow drop and stuff like that, and they can respond to that so quickly, their response time, because as soon as the stimulus hits, they can hit the ground. And it's not necessarily maybe that they're ducking, it's that they're just getting down to make that bound, right? So I don't think it's sound, and I don't think silencers on bows are as important as, not moving that much after the shot. Or maybe using camouflage arrows. I don't know, or supersonic arrows. I don't know, something beyond the deer's ability to see them. So I don't know this for sure, but it seems to make more sense to me. Okay. So that carries us up to another study that we did. We know that deer had the physiological capabilities to see blues and green and yellows. Okay, but what did they actually see? So we had to design a study actually to get inside the deers and let the deer tell us what they see. And I had a really clever graduate student at the time named Brad Cohen, who's now a professor up at Tennessee Tech. But he designed what we call a deer training apparatus, which works on a food reward. When the deer makes the right choice, it gets a reward. When it makes a wrong choice, it doesn't get a reward. So we set this thing up where we had 2 bins and we had lights over the bins. And when a trial started, there would be a buzzer goes off, the doors would open, and whichever one had the light on, if the deer went up to feed at that one, it was allowed to feed. If it went to the one that didn't have the light on, the door closed, it wasn't allowed to feed. So we trained the deer to respond. If it sees a light, it can eat. We just started with a white light. Well, then we worked with the Ever-Ready Energizer, and they were real gracious to work with us, and they actually had their labs in China come up with these very specific LEDs for us that had very specific wavelengths. And we tested them into the blue part of the spectrum and into the red part of the spectrum to see how well deer could see out in either one. And we ran these trials at different intensities of the light and at different wavelengths of the light over and over and over again. And it worked so well with one, we built 8 of them. And we had these trials running constantly over and over and over again. And the deer were starting to give us, they were making the right choice. And as soon as it got down to a point where the deer could not make a right choice, if it was a random choice, we know they couldn't see it anymore. So long story short, it turns out that deer see into the blue part, or the red part of the spectrum, very, very almost precisely what we predicted they would see as far as the physiology. And very similar to how we see out in that part. They don't see quite as far into the res. But very intriguingly, they see the blue so much more vividly than we do. In fact, they see blues probably in the estimated around 20 times as well as we do. Blues are that vivid to them. Because we're a long-lived species. We have filters in our eyes that block out a lot of the UV light. Or at 40, 50 years old, our lenses, our retinas would get burned out. Deer don't live that long. Some places they live a year and a half, right? So, so they don't have that filter in their lens that blocks out that UV, so it allows that light to actually come in. So their ability to see in the blues is incredible. Now, consider that compared to the hunter that goes out in the woods refusing to wear this, but wears blue jeans to a stand.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
This being a blaze orange hat for the audio listeners.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think the concept that's important from a UV and a blue for the listeners out there that may be a little confused about all this wavelength and color is if you walked under a nightclub light with a pair of blue jeans on or a white shirt, something that reflects in that UV, that blue range that glows, that's what we're talking about here. So we don't see it the same way. And in fact, for many years, well, still to this day, in fact, since the 40s, the laundry detergent industry has figured out how to change the reflectance of UV light on fabric and move it from a spectrum we can't see into one we can. So the brighteners and whiteners in your laundry detergents actually are reflecting light differently off that fabric, moving it from an area that we don't see well into one we can. Well, it starts in an area that deer can already see well and moves it into one that
they even see better.
They even see better. So
right.
So you're actually making your hunting clothes more and more glow, a greater and greater glow on your fabric just by adding those laundry detergents to your product. So you can have a otherwise good camo pattern or UV dead product that you can make UV hot just by putting, washing them with normal.
Well, a lot of fabrics, even on their dyes, have
built them in. Yeah,
they built them into them, and a lot of camels out there have it in them as well. Okay, so we can get a lot more into the UV brighteners and so forth. But the question is, why is blue so important to a deer?